Thank you for joining us today. We're happy to be here with everyone. We're happy to be with other people in person. And we're happy to get out of the house after this time. And so Chase, Mike, and I are here to talk with you about decentralized identity networks, verifiable credentials, and zero trust, and how they all come together. So first, I think what we'll do is do introductions. I'm Heather Dahl. I'm CEO and co-founder of Indicio. Mike?
Mike Vesey, CEO of IdRamp. If you guys can't hear me, let me know. My voice is usually...
They're recording it, so you need to use the mic.
Okay. Mike Vesey, CEO of IdRamp. IdRamp focuses on orchestration, primarily around identities. So we've done a lot of work with verifiable credentials. Definitely see the opportunities and the evolution that's going to come. So happy to be here today. Thanks, everyone.
Yep, and I'm Chase Cunningham. I'm a retired Navy chief, recovering forester analyst, because I think there should be like a support group for that if you've been there. And then author and also the chief strategy officer at Ericom Software.
And the three of us have been working in this space for a very long time now. And so that's where we really want to talk about. We've been working since this cartoon, and I think for all of us in this room, this cartoon is probably in your dreams or your nightmares, depending on your situation. But it really begs the question, what about the cats, right? What about the cats? Well, what we learned over the course of the pandemic is that no one knows if you're a cat or not either. And if you saw this video, you'll see that in a virtual courtroom in Texas, well, we couldn't decide if this gentleman was a cat. You could see why, or an attorney representing his client. And so the fact is, whether it's a feline or whether it's a canine, we still have this challenge with the internet on digital identity. And so we're in a world, especially with what happened over the last 2 years, that's advancing identity quicker than I think any of us had anticipated. But we are also finding the bounds, the challenges with previous approaches to identity, and trying to figure out how do we innovate beyond where identity was at the start of the pandemic. And what we really experienced in the last 2 years was that wall that we started to hit, but we also had new use cases that we never thought we would have to deal before. And because we saw those new use cases, we realized there is vast potential for digital identity to continue to innovate, to solve all these frustrating challenges that we all experience. And so when you look at traditional identity systems, this is oftentimes what the mind went to, especially circa 2020. This idea of a centralized database with access to it, often privately owned and controlled. The trust is at the single entity. But what that resulted in, and part of our challenge, is that there's copies of you everywhere. So what's interesting is a lot of the data that we share or receive is not authentic source data. It's actually replicas of data, other people's interpretation of data, and that creates challenge when you're trying to make decisions about whether you should take action with that data, whether you should consider it in your business decisions, or whether it's just flat fraudulent. And so that's where decentralized identity started to emerge, is how do you move away from having representations of data? How do you move into a more digital identity approach that represents what we do in the analog world with papers and cards and books? And how do you move that data where it is held by, in this case, the human, but it doesn't have to be a human. It can be a device, it can be an organization, it can be an animal, it can be a plant, it can be a thing. But that particular sensor, for instance, holds their data, and that the data that they hold is actually authentic source data that is secured. And so what has evolved over the course of a decade now is moving into this trusted digital ecosystem that really solves and protects the exchange of highly valued data, and does so where the data is immediately actionable. And it utilizes blockchain, but it's far greater than just a ledger. The power of this is in a total system. And what we've seen happen, especially over the last 2 years or so, is that we see use cases start very simple. A holder, an issuer, a verifier. Oftentimes in the organization. When people think about decentralized identity, they're often thinking great, grandiose, we got to boil the ocean, and that just is really hard, as we'll talk about, to execute. But what we're seeing is that they're starting very simple, and that they start bringing partners, customers, other organizations into their very simple ecosystem, which starts to create a constellation. And now, what we have seen, especially in the last 6 months, is these constellations are starting to connect with each other, where industries that normally have never had direct access to source data, because they didn't want to do a bunch of messy integrations, are actually connecting using decentralized identity and exchanging that value. But here's where it gets interesting, is that really, when you look at zero trust, it goes at this problem of how do you verify? How do you exchange and verify data in a zero trust approach? And so one of the things we look at as we're developing these trusted digital ecosystems is how does it fully enable a zero trust framework? And so Chase is going to talk to us a bit about, if you never trust, how do you verify? Is it with a centralized database? And what we're going to talk about is, the first question, Chase, I have for you is really, what have we learned from security breaches that impacts the direction of where we're going with decentralized identity?
Yeah, it's interesting because we have a market with billions of dollars going into it, and normally when you dump billions of dollars into something, you expect an outcome that's usable and an actual fixable solution. We don't seem to have that because we don't deal with the physics of the problem, the reality of what's going on. There was a recent study that was just published by Digital Shadows, said that on the underground, as it stands right now today, there's about, I think the number is 27 billion stolen credentials and identities out there available right now. And the last time I checked, there's only about 6 or 7 billion people on the planet. So that means if you have a credential and password, it's compromised somewhere somehow.
And where are they stealing them from?
Name it. You name it, right? Your Twitter, your bank, your healthcare system. If you're a veteran like me, they got it from OPM. Like you name it. If it's been used, it's been stolen. So I basically wipe the slate clean and say, okay, fine. My digital identity is compromised. It is what it is. Big deal. Like, there's insurance for this stuff. I'm not freaked out about it. I'm not buying your crappy Norton antivirus, whatever, and I'm not going to sit around and wonder, oh my God, is somebody going to break into my bank account? I'm broke anyway, so come after me. The reality of the problem, though, is if you want to fundamentally fix cybersecurity and actually move to a more secure posture, you deal with what you can control. Everybody gravitates to this Lockheed Martin kill chain thing. And I love this graphic because if you look at it, the bad guys really only control 2 pieces of that platform, right? The bad guys can recon all day long. If I'm in my house, I can't stop a bad guy from walking up and down the street and looking at my house going, I would sure like to rob that dude's place. There's nothing I can do about that. Just like on the internet, they can do a lot of recon and figure out vulnerabilities. They can go do open source stuff. They can phish you, all those things, right? They can recon from here till kingdom come. I can't stop weaponization. Someone will find a way to reverse engineer and break something because that's the nature of how we build things. It's going to be broken and will be used for malicious purposes. They'll break it, they'll use it because it's an exploit. It's there. However, I can stop these other things if I employ the correct controls. I can stop them from a successful delivery of that weaponized exploit. I can stop them from continued exploitation. I can stop them from installing additional tools. I can stop them from command and control. I can stop them from exfiltrating my data. What does this mean? This means if I approach the problem with what is the core where the bad guy lives, breathes, and succeeds, I take back 5 pieces of a kill chain instead of 2. Who wins when I have 5 and they have 2? And guess what they use for those other pieces? Access and credentials and growth and exploitation. It's not crazy super NSA level hacker shenanigans that cause these exploits and cause takedowns, right? Look at Capital One. Capital One spent $500 million a year on security. One admin whose handle actually was erratic, which is always something you want somebody to have as a handle inside of your Slack channel, literally was telling people, I'm about to wreck Capital One. And what happened? She stole everybody's information. Then everybody goes, oh my God, how did this happen? It's crazy. They told you, like it's there. And what did they use? Did she download NSA's Vault 7 exploitation system? Nope. She was a validated admin that had excessive privileges. Game over. Like,
Right.
this
And
is not rocket surgery.
And it all goes back to like this perimeter and how we rethink a perimeter. And oftentimes we think, okay, identity proves that I can enter the perimeter, right?
You know when the first fail of the perimeter-based model of security was? Just anybody want to, it's 1280 BC, the fall of Troy. What did we used to call malware? Trojans. Why? Because you slide a Trojan right past the wall. What happened when the horse got past the wall? Bad guys slipped out, moved laterally, burnt the city to the ground, and we got some really bad movie with Brad Pitt in it. Right? This is what we're dealing with. Like, this is we've known for 1,000+ years that that model of security fundamentally failed, and we took it and we put it in digital space. That requires us to be transitory and move past boundaries and said, yep, got it fixed. No one will ever hack this. Does that make a lick of sense? Go back one more. Just know this, that COVID, if you have any argument about the perimeter, if you think that you can still live in that old archaic model of cybersecurity that, like I said, we've known for 1,000 years has failed, COVID murdered it, right? COVID beat it to death. 26%, and the last numbers actually I saw on that with 33%, of the global workforce will never, ever return to in-office again full-time. So 1 in 3 employees roughly has had it. They're not driving to the office. They're not going to sit there in the DC traffic like I used to have to and scream and cuss and drink, not drink and drive, but anyway, 70% increase in the use of remote connectivity. Do you own that network that you're sitting on at your house? Did you build it? Did you configure it? Or did Comcast ship you that thing? You plugged it in and baby, you're on the internet. 76% increase in BYOD. I have literally turned down jobs recently where someone said, we're going to send you a corporate image. I don't want your machine. I have a box. So use my machine and I want to get to your network. Well, we'll do that with a VPN. I just felt a baby die somewhere. Like, let's not do that. This is where we are. This is how it looks. This is where the future goes. The next generation of kids, folks coming into the workforce, guess what? They don't want to live that old way anymore. If you're living in a perimeter-based model of security world, you are guaranteeing failure. You might as well just open it up, take your firewalls down, and call Russia.
Well, I think what we want to get at here is after you've called Russia,
Yeah,
and you'll help.
Yeah.
Is when you look at the principles of zero trust, what do we need to take from these principles as we think about identity and how we innovate forward?
Right, so this is important to take away is this is not zero faith. Everybody gets wrapped up around this as saying don't trust your employees, whatever else. That's not it. Trust your employees. They're great. They're super people. Drink beer with them. Raise puppies. Whatever you do with your employees. It's not zero faith. It's zero trust because trust is a risk. Trust is a relationship that's built into a computer system based on human emotions. We need to remove it. The way that you do that is very simple with these 3 things. Verify explicitly. Who are you? Why are you trying to get to this thing? What do you need? And is that valid? Okay, great. Least privilege access. If you're an admin, you will have admin controls and access, but I'm looking at what you're doing and I'm dialing in a little bit more specifically because of the role-based access side of this. If you're not a regular admin, why do you have admin privileges? So let's bring those down. And then lastly, assume breach. You're compromised. Are you on the internet? You're compromised. Great. There's going to be a time horizon tied to this. Why? Because bad guys love not to have time horizons. If I'm going to break into a bank, I want to sit there as long as I can and load all that money up into my cart so that I can leave. If you do these 3 things, you're not enabling all of ZT. It's not perfect. It's not going to take care of all the problems, but you're enabling the fundamental things that the adversary needs to be successful. And this is not a game of perfect defense. This is not a game of I'll never have a breach. Literally, it says assume breach. It's about dealing with the fact that this is what burns organizations to the ground. And if you take these things away, you begin to win. And this is a movement. It's global in nature. I'm literally going to Capitol Hill and the White House next week with the Zero Trust Advisory Group because if you saw the Biden memorandum earlier on the federal government that said thou shalt move to ZT, guess what? The people up there don't really understand ZT. They just take our really good words and say that they came up with it and then they put it out to everyone and go look at all the cool stuff we're doing. They want us to come back and do that again. So there will be a new Biden advisory on ZT in the September timeframe. 78% of organizations globally are moving to ZT. I was talking with somebody at RSA from Cameroon, Africa, that had read a bunch of stuff on ZT and was moving to ZT in Cameroon, which was really cool. 100% of the DoD has been mandated by the President of the United States from on high with 2 tablets and a big gray beard, thou shalt enable ZT. 13% of major financials, 14% of healthcare. 89% of S&R leaders agree that the perimeter-based model of security is categorically failed. If you can get 9 out of 10 technologists to agree on anything, it's a thing. And the TAM, the market, the addressable market for this is about $40 billion right now. Estimates are up to $52 billion next year. The markets are going sideways, right? We're in a, what do they call it, bear market? Isn't that the bad thing? Bear is bad, bull is good. I don't have enough money to care. But this is going to get bigger, better, faster, because guess what's the one thing you need is we do more commerce, more digital stuff, more transaction online. Security.
And one of the things, I mean, people sometimes ask me, how did you get involved in decentralized identity? Actually, I started working on decentralized identity with Chase about 13 years ago. And when you think about it, we were working on what became the Zero Trust framework over time here, but really, they're not separate. Zero Trust and identity are not separate. They're actually, think of them more salt and pepper. They go together, but for some reason, it's been like separated. Like there's Zero Trust and then there's decentralized identity, but people don't realize actually they started being developed together when we first started thinking towards this framework and what became the Zero Trust concept here.
Yeah, the mechanism that all of this revolves around is the identity. And like you said, it's not necessarily a person's identity. Nowadays, everything has an identity. You've got identities for thermostats. You have identities for robots. If you go to, I did a thing with Harley Davidson, and I looked at their network, and everything inside of HD's network, including the stuff that welds the motorcycles, has got an actual MAC address. Like, it's all got an identity. So identity is what all this revolves around. And if you look at the history of exploitation, yes, there are some anomalies and some tangents where there was some crazy whatever that actually occurred. The majority of them, 8, 9 times out of 10, it's around the use of an identity to cause compromise.
Right, and in the compromise, are you going through never trust and verifying? Are you verifying against the compromised centralized database with the information that you're trying to verify, which is why the move was towards a decentralized approach to the verification of the identity.
Yeah, we don't want databases. I don't want databases with lots and lots of password and username records, because those are great. And that's for the bad guys and the red teamers of the world. We love those things. For the defenders, I don't want that. I want it decentralized. I want it one-to-one. I want it spread across infrastructure. And I want to make it where if one system gets hit, not everything burns down. You know, being the retired Navy guy, I like watertight integrity. I can lose a couple of compartments, ship stays afloat. I don't want the Titanic.
Exactly. Well, what we're going to do is turn the conversation here to Mike, and I think what we've been working on this for 5 years now, focusing on the commercial market, the adoption of this approach. How do you bring zero trust and identity together? And really, I think, Mike, a good place to start is to talk about first the market views, but I think what's most important, and we've had a lot of experience in the last 2 years, especially speaking together, the misconceptions around decentralized identity.
Yeah, and this is really exciting. So, I mean, Chase did a great job of laying out, you know, the problem. This is the problem, and this is where people are trying to get to. I'm really excited today because I get to talk about some of the things we've seen. So out in the trenches, talking to people, trying to get there, right? They don't understand the journey, and it's very complicated. So I thought we'd start, you know, we'll share some of the market views that we see, because these are things we hear every day. People say, hey, I'd really like to do this decentralized thing, and I'd really like to identify people better, but there's all these problems with it, you know, and they look at the ideology and all the conversations that are going around in the community, and they don't see the business strategy, right? They don't understand that this is really cost savings. This is reduction in friction. This is all of these great benefits. All they see are the problems, and they see the forklift, you know. So that's one view that we see all the time. They also think there's a loss of control. And it's actually not a loss of control at all. In fact, most of the attributes that we decentralize and issue to our people in our ecosystems are things we control completely. We're just providing a way to verify those at a perimeter instead of coming back to a centralized repository. So it makes more sense. Again, it's real world cost savings. It's insulation against the single point of failure. In every enterprise, the single point of failure, the biggest application that can be hit is the IAM. If that baby goes down, you're done. So if you can decentralize the verification needed to make your intelligent business decisions and your authentication and access management flows through decentralization, it makes all the sense in the world. To do that, we have to identify, right? So that's the challenge. How do we bring in these new technologies, these processes to do the verification and then build the policies and rules and to allow those to be implemented. Another big thing we see is, I kind of just leaned into it a little bit, replatforming. That's the kiss of death. If you walk in and say, here's how we're going to get there, and it involves you buying this new thing and starting from scratch, you're done. So we focus especially, and I think as a community we're doing a better job. There's people that are inventing the technology and focused on the technology, and then there's those of us that are in the trenches, and I think all three of us represent this. We're implementing this, right? It's not futureware to us. This is stuff that we implement and help organizations solve these complex problems. And we do it without retrofitting or replatforming. We come in, take your existing, and add on to it and put all these new technologies in play. It's a huge misperception in the industry that it requires a start from scratch. Battle testing, technical maturity, proof of life. We're going to show you some actual examples of projects that we've worked on, products that are in the market, really exciting, that are using this technology today. And people use it and don't have any idea that they're using it, but it's the methods that we've implemented and deployed in there are actually helping with securing people's interactions, and we're doing it in a way that's seamless enough that everybody can adopt and take it on. Cryptocurrency, I don't need to say much on that. We hear that a lot, obviously. There's just some misunderstanding that they think this is, related to crypto, and, the biggest among those is personal information on the ledger. I get that question.
Every time.
A lot, right? Every single time.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I don't want all my personal information out on some ledger. Well, it never is, right? So the nature of how this is being implemented today is using the ledger for that verification I was talking about, that edge verification, using technology that's been around for years, just same PKI you use in other places in your life. And that personal information never gets out of your control or your organization's control or whoever the issuer of that data is that trusts it to you. So it's really a great design, and it does lead to, as I mentioned, a lot of added velocity and reduced cost.
And the second most popular question lately is,
Exactly.
what about the gas fees?
Yeah, how much is it going to cost me? And thanks to great work in DCO team and others I've been working on, those are just not a thing anymore. So we just don't have to worry about those costs and how those impact our transactions.
And then what happens? Yeah.
Exactly. Gas is expensive.
Gas
We do have
is
gas
expensive, and you don't need to pay $5 a gallon for this. And then the last one is, what happens when you drop your phone in the swimming pool?
What happens when you drop your wallet in the swimming pool, right?
Well, you get your credentials reissued.
Exactly.
And
Maybe
so it's the
yeah.
same answer here. You get your credentials reissued.
Yeah.
But I think, we see a lot of discussion around composable enterprises, and we talk about orchestration. And I think what's unique here is this presents the opportunity for decentralized orchestration.
Yeah, and orchestration, in my mind, of course, I believe this because where my company spends most of its time, but I think orchestration is the solution. We have, as we mentioned, it's not just saying, okay, zero trust, we're there, right? You have to identify. Decentralization, at its core, does a great job of holding these credentials private, but you still have to identify before you know who these are. So we really see the need to have plug and play with traditional infrastructure. We have to bring in best of breed technology and use that in the process of identifying and then potentially credentialing or whatever we need to do our verification on the edge. And it takes all of these things. It's not one magic wand that we wave and it's done. It takes everything. It takes it takes compliance with existing standards like FIDO and things, and it takes biometrics. It takes all of these different variables that we have to use in order to get the identification we need in order to have an effective decentralization strategy. So in my mind, orchestration is the single most important thing that we can do to ensure a successful journey on our way to zero trust and beyond.
I think what's interesting, the perspective you bring, and we're going to walk through some of these, is that this is being adopted across industries. Like when I think about what my week looks like, it goes from clean energy to education to IoT to spatial web to travel to hospitality to healthcare, to federated identity providers who are making a transition to decentralization. I mean, it just spans, and you really witness this in where your seat.
Yeah, we get that question a lot. Oh, what sector are you guys serving?
Right.
And I'm like, whatever the call today is about, because it goes across everything. And we're going to show a few of these, opportunities and things that we're working on. The state of North Dakota right now issues a digital credential to every graduating student that contains their CLR, their Common Learner Record, and they can choose to store that on their device if they would like. And then the state has gone out through partners and found other verifiers that plug in and can do verification of that information that is presented by the student real time with a simple QR code interaction. So by one scan, they get this transcript and they can go out to the ledger and say, has this been tampered with? Is it legitimate? I say, absolutely, it looks good to me. And they can make a decision, whether that's higher education admittance, whether that's an employer needing to know a GED equivalency, whatever it is, those decisions can be made immediately now, real time. There are small, in our journey here, we talked to several colleges, of course, and we were talking to a small junior college in the state of Iowa that is signing up to use this system for North Dakota students that apply to their college. They have 2 full-time people that do nothing but verify this information. They get the information, they call, they have to verify this, and then they have to go and verify residency, they have to verify all this stuff. It can all be done now through one simple transaction and one simple interaction, and those 80 hours a week of man-hour can be repurposed elsewhere. So it's a really great project.
I mean, what my personal favorite, and I love Zoom Bouncer, because I often get the question, well, what about grandma? What about grandma using this? And while I think actually over the last 2 years, probably more grandmas do use Zoom, but this represents a more consumer-based approach that not only brings decentralized identity, but it wraps it into a consumer-friendly name like Bouncer.
Yeah, we really needed a way, we worked a long time on building this orchestration tool that had these many facets and could be used for a lot of different challenges and solve a lot of different problems. But we felt the need, especially as COVID came in, we felt the need to really put a laser point on this, laser focus. We had to solve a problem. The problem is Zoom bombing. That slide that Heather shared, that's a real slide. I don't remember the exact backstory, but it was something like this guy's kid had put the picture of the cat as one of those moving face things, and he didn't know how to turn it off, and so he showed up for his hearing or whatever it was, and now he's a cat. And so he spent the first 20 minutes of this thing trying to tell these guys that really it was him and not a cat. So it's a crazy real story, and we've all, I would venture a guess that everyone in this room has probably been on a meeting that has had an uninvited participant show up. And it always happens at the worst time. So our idea was, let's build a tool and let's try to secure every single attendee in that tool. And it really picks up where Zoom leaves off. Zoom, you can put in email addresses and it'll do, it'll basically just ask you for that email address. I'm not sure how far it verifies. We actually coupled this with that, or you can use OTP, you can use FIDO, or you can go clear into biometrics. If you want to, you can use biometric registration to enforce entry into this meeting. And the flow is as simple as click on the native Zoom link, you get an alert, and your phone uses a verifiable credential. You don't know you're using a verifiable credential. You use a verifiable credential to validate your email address, ensuring that that's legit. Then it asks if you'd like to open your camera to do a liveness check. Open your camera, it matches that against a predetermined template. Depending on how secure you want to be, this is up to you as the host of this event. And it'll do the liveness match, the safe health check, and then you can get into your meeting. It works incredibly slick. There are 2 interactions. You click a green button to verify your email address, you take a picture of yourself, and you're in your meeting.
And this is something where those who are in the decentralized identity landscape, I challenge you to run your business using decentralized identity. Chase talked about the perimeter is already open. And I also think it's important to, if you have a decentralized identity company, you should be using decentralized identity solutions. And so Indicio does use Bouncer for our meetings, all of our customer meetings and the meetings with community members as well. And we've had great success with Bouncer.
Yeah, we've been using it as well, and it is in the Zoom marketplace now. It's this is not intended to be a sales pitch for Bouncer, but this is an example of the types of solutions we're going to see come to market. This is using all of the great technology we just talked about, but packaged in a way that nobody knows.
Right.
They just use it. And that's where we need to get to if we want mass adoption, and we really want to move the needle. And we've done it with a completely non-threatening, you don't have to know your user, there's no mention of blockchain, there's no anything in that, but you're using all this creative technology, and you're using it in a really simple package.
And then this moves on to citizen public sector as well.
Yeah, we did a really fascinating pilot project with a major city here in the US that wanted to do a citizen ID, but they really didn't know what they wanted to do it for. Oh, we need a citizen ID. Okay, for what? Well, I don't know. Well, you have 141 public-facing services, and all of those services, the vast majority of those services, had their own identity. They all had a registration process. They all had a username and a password that you had to remember. And so if you interacted with multiple government-provided services, you had to have a Rolodex of usernames and passwords just to keep track of how you were logging in. What we took in a very short amount of time is we issued the digital credential based on their standards. Here's the vetting process we want to go through and whatever it is. We issued that credential to their residents. And then we retrofitted these services through traditional interactions. So all of these services were sitting out there, and they didn't know anything about verifiable credentials, but they did know OAuth or SAML or OIDC, or in some cases, weird APIs from some system that was written 14 years ago. And we took all of those and just kind of put them into this big mixing board and said, okay, going forward, you're going to use verifiable credentials, and then we translate that information and send it back to the service and whatever their OAuth native service was. The result was, this is the end user experience. So it went from, I'm going to store a Rolodex of credentials and have to know, to just having this payload of data stored on my phone that contains all of the information I need to validate into any one of those 141 social services. Now, any of the services that I go to might be asking for different information. Jobs and unemployment may need my social security number, but another service may only need my driver's license number. The important thing is I, as the resident, I don't have to know that. I don't have to go find that. All I have to do is approve it. I still have to say, yes, I'm willing to send this information to the jobs and unemployment site, but I don't have to go look for it. I don't have to keep it organized. It all lives in my little data vault inside my smartphone, and it's pulled out by the verifier as needed.
So I think we'll bring this to a close here, where we talk about Composer and how it dovetails with Zero Trust, and move to questions.
Sure, yeah, this is, again, all of these examples and tools were really built through orchestration. This is where we have focused the majority of our time over the last several years. What we've ended up with is this product that is not an identity. So that was a very difficult and very tough decision for us to make, is not to be an identity provider. So we wanted to do all this cool orchestration. We wanted to do, have the biometric hooks and have the, FIDO authentication and verifiable credentials, issuers and verifiers and all this great stuff. It would have been much easier for us to just say, okay, you come in and register, and we're gonna be your identity, and then we're gonna use that identity to go out to other services. Instead, we took a different approach and said, we're just going to be a composer, and we're gonna sit in the middle. We're gonna take in any attribute source or any identity source you might have, and we're gonna take in any service, your workflow you wanna get to, and we're just gonna allow you to drag and drop and tell us what you want to do and create reusable policies. And the important thing is we can do that without code. So Composer is really an example of that in action. And the dashboard, you can see, we just took a couple screenshots here, but you can load in any of these identity providers you want, and you can select the services that you want to organize and interface with. In a very visual way, build that policy and deliver it. I think, do we have one more slide on?
Here we go.
Yeah, so you can choose the type of authentication and factors. So for example, what we're showing here is for my employees to log into Salesforce, I've enabled like 5 different identity providers. Not sure why I would ever do that. One of them is digital credentials. So again, I'm not really having to select or code or do anything special to use a verifiable credential. I don't even have to know it's a verifiable credential. I certainly don't have to know there's a blockchain involved. All I have to do is I have to say, if I want to use a digital credential. And maybe I want another factor on that. Maybe I want a biometric factor, or maybe I want a FIDO device check. I can just enable it with just a simple toggle of a radio button.
I think what's most important as we move to our next section, which is called Stump the Panelist, is what we've talked about. There was a great deal of traction made in the last 2 years. It's kind of like with the pandemic, a lot of progress was made, and then we're all coming back to these identity events and we're realizing, oh my gosh, these are actually deployed commercial solutions in the marketplace. But the key is that everything you need to build is available today. Now you can walk out of the room and start building your solution, whereas compared to 2 years ago, that wasn't really necessarily what you could do. But let's move to this section called Stump the Panelist. We all are going to take questions. We've got 2 panelists ready to take anything you can throw their way. Yes.
Okay, I've got a super technical question that's going to be really complicated.
Okay, great. We love it.
I don't think it will be, but the term verifiable credential is like a concept, and it's also standards, more than 1 standard, more than 2 standards, more than 3 standards. Can you elaborate on the concept and then also specifically what standards are underlying that?
Right. So the main thing that I look at is I work a lot in interoperability. How do you create interoperable solutions between everyone doing, right, their small, simple solution? And there are really 7 layers of interoperability, everything from the ledger to the signature style to the schema, et cetera. And we actually have a white paper out there that lays out all these layers and then how they map against the standards that you talk about, whether W3C, whether some of the work going on at DIF, whether the Hyperledger, et cetera. And we start mapping those all together. But it's still an area where standards are coalescing and standards are emerging as we go and roll up our sleeves and implement these solutions. So standards and making things interoperable is a really fascinating place to be.
Yeah, and the really cool thing there is, so you just hit on a really important part, a really important question that we get a lot from customers, potential customers. They get lost in all of this emerging, and like, hey, how do we know whatever we invest in today isn't going to be obsolete tomorrow? Well, it will, because isn't everything? And you know, the really cool thing that's going on, though, if you guys haven't been tracking in great detail, is Hyperledger Indy is kind of the gold standard, I guess, for identity. It does everything the right way, in my opinion, keeping PII off the ledger. There's a lot of work, really great work being done right now to bring in a new, the standards body that will allow those separate Indy networks to seamlessly traverse. That is huge. Once we flatten that layer out, we'll work on things for ION, which is Microsoft's Bitcoin-based system, and of course Ethereum has their identity stuff that they're working on. But getting this spec, this DID Indy spec, which is going to unify all of the Indy networks in the world, and there's a bunch by governments, private organizations, as well as Indicio's ledger. I mean, there's many out there. It's going to really flatten that out, and that's going to be. That's going to be, I believe, the catalyst that really drives a lot of the adoption, especially for the enterprise. Right now, the enterprise is they're kind of standoffish. Like, I think we should build our own because we really want to control everything and maintain resilience. And that's great. Do it. I don't have any reservation of it because I know that it's going to be completely interoperable with everyone else. So build your own ecosystem. We're building the bridges to allow those ecosystems to interact. And, the future is incredibly bright.
Right. So feel free to reach out to me and we can do a good hour call going through all the layers. More than happy to do that. Do we have more questions? One for Chase or Lucy.
I have a question kind of in response to like what
Yeah.
Mike was saying about Indy. Just being in the field for a little while, I know that like, Indy is certainly a kind of good starting point for a lot of organizations to start experiencing decentralized identity. But at the same time, I think we're also kind of seeing, start saying like blockchain is not like the only thing that people need to go to, right? I think Indy is a blockchain option, also as well as there are other blockchain options. And for enterprises, also a lot of governments probably they don't want to start with blockchain, they want to start with some existing kind of infrastructure that also kind of enable decentralized identity. So if you can elaborate a little bit on, depending, I think the audience
Right.
probably not from like the decentralized identity space to give them an idea beyond just like a particular solution, what else kind of options we can start with those decentralized identities.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great point that you made. The question was to elaborate on the different. There's different ways of doing decentralization. Decentralization is not a blockchain network, right? Decentralization is the process of getting information out of those centralized data stores, putting it in some kind of a credential, and issuing it to a holder to bring back and verify without coming back to that central data source. A very important distinction. You can do that in a number of ways. Indy is a great place to start. It's probably, it has to be the most widespread way of holding those credentials and building that independent ecosystem for verification and issuance today. But there are many other technologies that are marching in that direction, which is why this is such a special time. Because now it's not a question of if we're going to decentralize, it's a question of how quickly. And I agree, that's a great point to make. Decentralization is more than a blockchain network.
Absolutely.
But you know, the fact that we are taking all of these different networks that have popped up over the last few years and focusing on the interoperability and the bridging of those networks is also a very important thing for the industry and especially the enterprise to understand, because this is exactly how other networking standards started as well, right? We had Banyan Vines, I'm dating myself horribly, Banyan Vines and Novell and all these different networking standards, and then they were all separate. You know, Vines had their own protocol, and then TCP/IP came out and just kind of unified everything, and all those networks came together, and we built the internet. And the same thing is happening now with decentralization and identity networks.
Well, I think we're in our last 2 minutes, and so we'll take one last question if there is one. Yes. Yes. Question's yours.
Sorry. So on misconception slide, you mentioned no gas tax and what will I do if I lose my cell phone. So that implied that there should be some, recovery infrastructure. So who pays for it?
It depends on the use case. We see use cases where there's an entry fee to use the solution. We see use cases where the issuer of the credential pays the verifier. We see use cases where a verifier pays for the opportunity to verify the credential. We see use cases where the holder, much like you pay for your driver's license and you go to the DMV, the holder pays for the issuing of the credential, and that issuing fee gets baked into an existing fee that they already pay. So it's like added in as another $1. So it depends on the use case, on who and how the payment structure works. There are multiple ways to process exchange of value, from brokers to escrows to, subscriptions to the ecosystem. It really comes down to what the use case is and who receives the most value, and then how do you create mechanisms to exchange that value in ways that are regulatory compliant for your company, organization, and ecosystem. So there's no one size fits all. Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. I get you. I had a couple of things, but I guess one of them was the accessibility of these options that you provide, so access options, as well as I was interested also in the viability of having the decentralization if you are going to be depending on hardware that's going to be eventually obsolete, because those kinds of things, some people will hang on to devices that are no longer secure. Even, is there a way that you're going to be able to bypass that or circumvent it so that you don't have to worry about the hardware that things are put on, so that you can still protect that decentralized ID?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of governance in that, right? If I'm an enterprise organization and I start supporting a BYOD or, a BYO device, right, where people are going to be bringing their own, I'm going to have to set my policies around that. I'm going to have to manage that and maintain the compliance with that. So you got a good point. From moving from, hardware platform to hardware platform, it really kind of leads into the previous question. You can export it, you can re-import it, or you can reissue everything. My thoughts on the payment cycle. I used to think, well, it's always got to be free for the holder, right? everything's got to be free for the holder. And then I started thinking about the real world. It's not, right? I pay handsomely for that driver's license and all the other credentials that I have issued. So I don't know how that one's going to play out, but it's an interesting place to consider.
Well, on behalf of Chase, Mike, and myself, we want to thank you for joining us. The three of us will be here in the hallway. We'll be around for the rest of the day, too, and we're on all the socials. If you want to reach out, we're more than happy to spend dedicated time talking with each of you one-on-one. So thank you for joining us today.